So, we are going to start with Malta, and John, it's over to you. We're looking forward to the presentation.
Thank you, Philip, and good morning all. There's this bright light, I can hardly see you, but you're there, I assume. Thank you. Can you hear me well? All right, thank you. So, my colleague Salvina, Muscat, and I will be presenting as senior policy advisors to the Ministry of Education in Malta on the work that we have been doing in relation to a national framework for education in Malta that is currently being developed, but also focusing on a policy aspect, the enactment and the implementation and professional development that goes with the policy. Our focus today is primarily on the professional development aspect of the policy. So, there are 5 points that we want to make. I will talk to the first 3, and my colleague will talk to the last 2. We will be brief, of course, like all the presentation of cases, and then we can have discussions further even if you have more questions. I want to start with a cartoon. I think we need to have more laughter and more energy on the kind of work that we do. My children, it says, the cartoon, can you see it from there? Yeah. Not only learn their ABCs, they learn how to be functioning members of today's dynamic democracy and to mind their snippy little tongues. I think we have to smile about our own contradictions and tensions that sometimes we find ourselves in, and sometimes also that we create ourselves unwillingly and unwittingly. All this work, as we see it, is based on a certain theoretical perspective. And to remind you of this, I quote from the French poet Paul Valéry, who writes, "There is no theory," and we usually add, "there is no practice that is not a fragment carefully preserved of some autobiography." And I link this with Professor Gus John's quote that our leadership, however we conceive of it, reflects who we are, and who we are determines our leadership. Okay? So this is the framework from which we work, which we believe is very consistent both with the central points developed in the National Strategy of Education in Malta 2014-2024, and also with EPNoSL's primary focus on equity and leadership. If you're interested in the National Strategy Framework, the document is available from the Ministry's webpage, the address is there, and briefly, here are the underlying crucial values: inclusivity, equity, social justice, diversity of all kinds, from race to gender, sexuality, ability, and so on. And it is based on a pedagogy of hope and possibilities, rather than a deficit mentality. It also acknowledges the problems that standardization, or one-size-fits-all, actually creates the deficit mentality itself. Ultimately, we believe that standardization, or one-size-fits-all, a priori, we don't need any empirical evidence for this, it happens always that, by definition, one-size-fits-all creates marginalizations. And in a sense, we would argue, it reproduces a dangerous kind of colonialism and imperialism. And therefore, if we are serious about school leadership and equity, we have to make sure that we are aware of the problem of standardization and the limitations that it a priori creates. It is a tension, but we have to acknowledge it. And ultimately, the strategy promises support to all educators at all levels. So, what my colleague and I have been doing in reflecting on the context of Malta and reflecting on the beliefs promoted and adhered to by the Ministry of Education and Employment in Malta, that is social justice, diversity and equity, we have developed, or co-developed, with also some people from the field, an intensive preparation program to work with the high management in the Ministry of Education itself and the so-called middle management, including principals of colleges and heads of schools and assistant heads of schools, 1,100 people in all. And we have conducted this intensive professional development to explain the rules, so to speak, of the strategy itself. Not the prescriptions, but the conceptualization of it. And then they will enact it as they see fit within their own contexts, of course. A program that we have now conducted with 1,100 people in small groups of 30. The minister was willing that we would do this in bigger groups. We said, no, if we are consistent with our beliefs, this should be in small groups, and we did that over a period intensively of 6 months. And the next step is now to tell you a bit about the program, and also then Salvina will talk about the responses, the anonymous responses we have received from the participants, and what we have learned, and hopefully will continue to learn as we move ahead. Now, let's be clear, whether we like it or not, we live, unfortunately, from my perspective, in neoliberal times. Okay? And if we are serious about school leadership and equity and democracy, then we need to struggle and try to diminish the impact of neoliberalism so defined. I could do an entire lecture on neoliberalism, but that is not the point of this talk this morning. In contrast, we work with what we refer to as a critical democratic perspective, where democracy is seen not simply as a form of governance, but democracy is seen as a way of life that takes life seriously, with all its laughter, tragedies, and contradictions, and so on. All right? And this is how we would define it. Again, I could talk to each of these, but please note that it includes equity and not just equality of opportunity, and it includes activism as well. In a nutshell, then, we are working with the concepts that are identified on the slide in blue. Equity rather than sameness. Equality of outcome rather than just equality of opportunity, as is the case within the liberal tradition. Focusing on a variety of standards to operate at the same time. And some people will say this will create lack of excellence. On the contrary, if you allow a variety of standards at the same time, it will increase the excellence, because then you are actually capturing the varieties of beliefs and cultures and so on. Moving beyond the private realm to focus on the public realm. Not get stuck with antagonism, seeing each other as enemies if we disagree with each other, but in an agonistic way. We may disagree, but we need to work with each other, even if we may not have one common aim. And therefore, we need to move beyond procedures and move on substantive, controversial issues. We need to go beyond discussions. We can discuss here forever, which is fine to discuss, but ultimately, we need to act and take a stance. All of this is influenced by, for example, work as the late Brazilian educator Paulo Freire. Now, the content of the program. The program consists of 3 parts. The first part focuses on reflective practice and inclusive leadership. And we are, by inclusive leadership, and I will say, I have 1 or 2 slides, we are including a whole variety of things, from, for example, Philip Wood's democratic leadership, critical leadership, empowering leadership, possibly some aspects of distributive leadership, feminist forms of leadership, and so on. The second part focuses on student engagement as a way of life and strategies and techniques, but not just techniques, also as a way of life, and the problem of the deficit mentality, which is inherent to the belief of standardization, which we think is very problematic, and then the third part on social justice, education, and leadership. We did this, as I said, in groups of 30, and we've had a mixture of activities, mini lectures, poetry, narratives, case studies, small group and large group discussions. And ultimately, we want them to ask and consider some very serious questions about equity, just as the ones on this slide. Philip is saying I have 2 minutes, which includes your part. So ultimately, yes, ultimately, this is my last slide. We are working with a conception of leadership as captured by those in red: collective element, possibilities and hope, wider notion, and agonism. Salvina? Okay, there you go.
Okay, it was important to use real-life studies and the examples, our own baggage, you know, because in that sense, everybody could relate his own real-life experiences. It was also a learning experience for us, because we made the professionals feel the situation that their students experience when they are in the classroom situation. Sometimes also we made persons take decisions, and no matter the decisions, it was very important to see that we could each sustain our decisions. We were all thinking differently, but we were all thinking for the benefit of the student in the classroom. So we had many responses, you know, different types of responses, and all were beneficial to the whole group. You know, it was a really learning experience for everybody, and no matter what the decisions were and the tasks we took, it was very important to see the participation and the understanding and the democratic atmosphere that reigned all through the courses. We are now in the process of repeating this with all teachers. We also had some very worthwhile experiences, like someone who told us, "Thank you for reminding me that from ashes of disaster grow the roses of success." Sometimes you are at an end where you don't believe anymore in success, but somehow our professional development managed to boost and elicit the exceptional participation of these persons involved. And all through the exercise, we were flexible enough to be able to accept also changes, you know, and so this helped all through. We had different responses, you know. John used cartoons. We used different examples, different tasks, and it was interesting to see how everybody, for example, you know about Malta and Gozo. We are two small islands, but the way the teachers in Gozo, the way the professionals in Gozo taught, was very, very different from those on the mainland, the way they taught in Malta, you know. And this helped us even learn more how things happen differently, even at such a short distance. We have future plans. Everybody is asking us to repeat, and in fact we started on having more professional development on cooperative leadership, especially for the senior management teams, and now we will continue to develop further. And the ministry is also in the process of planning an institute for educational leadership. We have met a lot of colleagues here, which are ready to help us in this institute and this idea, because all through it was a substantive idea that we need all the partners on the island, but also beyond the island. In a sense, EPNoSL has helped us in this way, definitely, certainly, and I am sure that for the benefit of our students, for the benefit of all the students whom we come into contact, such a help will help them develop into better persons. Unlike the last cartoon we have here, where we have the usual teacher who says that he wants to develop them into innovative and independent learners, critical thinkers, but they have to do what he says. Thank you very much.